Most boat owners believe saltwater corrosion is something they can see: a rusty fitting, a pitted prop, bubbling paint on the hull. They look at the boat, see nothing alarming, and assume the corrosion problem is not theirs. That belief is exactly how a boat ends up structurally compromised before the owner ever notices anything wrong. The damage that ends marine hardware, destroys drives, severs propeller shafts, and dissolves through hull fittings from the inside happens below the waterline, inside the hull, and behind surfaces that nobody inspects. It is not rust in the traditional sense. It is an electrochemical process that requires no oxygen, produces no visible product on the surface, and operates continuously as long as the boat is in the water. The phrase for it is invisible damage. The mechanics of how it works explain why even well-maintained boats end up with catastrophic metal failures that their owners never saw coming. Here is the reality of the saltwater environment. Seawater is an electrolyte. It conducts electricity. When two metals that sit at different positions on the galvanic scale are in contact with each other and immersed in that electrolyte, they form a galvanic cell. The more active metal, the one lower on the galvanic scale, begins to release electrons to the less active metal. As West Marine's corrosion documentation confirms, this generates a current that gradually deteriorates the more reactive metal. That metal is called the anode. In this context, it is dissolving, slowly, silently, and continuously. The less active metal, the cathode, is protected at the anode's expense. This is a fundamental law of electrochemistry, not a maintenance problem, not a product defect, and not something that affects only neglected boats. It affects every dissimilar metal pairing on every boat in saltwater, right now, regardless of how new the boat is or how diligently the owner maintains it. The single most important thing to understand about galvanic corrosion is that the severity depends entirely on how far apart the two metals are on the galvanic scale. The greater the difference in electrical potential between them, the faster the more active metal corrodes. Cruising World's corrosion documentation, written by Steve D'Antonio, who holds ABYC Master Technician status and sits on multiple ABYC technical committees, gives a direct example of what this looks like in practice. In 1895, the Harris-Hoff-designed America's Cup Contender Defender was assembled using a nickel-aluminum alloy hull above the waterline and bronze plate below, over steel frames with bronze rivets throughout. This created what D'Antonio described as a battery-like galvanic mixture. The hull plating pitted so heavily it was no longer seaworthy. That was not a maintenance failure. It was a predictable electrochemical outcome of combining metals that should never have been in contact. The same process is happening at a smaller scale on production boats everywhere, where stainless steel fasteners contact aluminum components, where bronze through hull fittings sit against dissimilar backing materials, and where aluminum outdrives mount to stainless steel hardware without adequate isolation. David Pascoe, who has conducted over 5,000 pre-purchase surveys, documented another variant that owners rarely recognize. A stainless steel bolt installed in a fiberglass hull seems like a simple, inert fastener. But water that enters the screw hole where there is no free flow of circulation turns acidic in the crevice and creates a localized galvanic cell. The stainless steel corrodes right under the bolt head, eroding the shank until the fastener becomes loose. The bolt looks structurally intact from above the deck. The corrosion is entirely inside the hole, invisible until the fitting fails under load. The defense against galvanic corrosion is the sacrificial anode. They are zinc, aluminum, or magnesium, depending on the water type. The anode is intentionally the most active metal in the system. It corrodes first, at the expense of everything connected to it. The Sleipner Group's corrosion documentation states the replacement threshold precisely. Replace anodes when they are 50% consumed, not at the end of the season, not when they look thin. at 50%. Below that threshold, the anode no longer has sufficient active surface area to protect the metals behind it, and those metals begin to corrode instead. Christian and Company marine surveyors, an accredited survey firm, documented the consequence of skipping this interval directly. Once the anode is depleted, corrosion moves to the next least noble metal. That is typically the propeller, the shaft, or a through-hull fitting. The prop they described from a depleted anode scenario showed heavy pitting and pink discoloration from desensification, the process where the zinc corrodes out of the alloy, leaving a spongy, brittle metal that looks solid but crumbles under load. That is a propeller that fails at speed. And it happens gradually, invisibly, while the boat looks completely fine from the deck. Now here is where the problem escalates from a maintenance issue to a structural emergency. Galvanic corrosion, as destructive as it is, operates slowly. It gives the attentive owner time to catch it if they inspect regularly. Stray current corrosion does not. Steve D'Antonio documented the distinction in his published corrosion engineering material with unmistakable clarity. Unlike galvanic corrosion, which occurs comparatively slowly, stray current corrosion moves with startling rapidity, potentially destroying a propeller, shaft, thruster, sail drive, or stern drive in a matter of days, not seasons. Days. Christian and Company marine surveyors confirmed the same finding from their own survey records, stating that extreme cases of stray current corrosion can result in a good propeller taking the form of Swiss cheese in a matter of days, and that a through-hull flange can disappear entirely. A through-hull flange is the only barrier between the ocean and the interior of the hull. When stray current eats through it, the boat sinks. Not on a timeline measured in seasons. On a timeline measured in the days remaining until the next haul out. If you've made it this far, do me a favor and hit subscribe. The mechanism is straightforward and documented in detail by both D'Antonio and Boat Test's stray current analysis. A faulty electrical connection located in or near bilge water creates a current leak. That current has to return to its source, which is the vessel's battery. Electricity does not seek ground. It seeks a return path to its source, and it will find one. In a typical bilge current scenario, the leaked current travels from the connection through the bilge water to a nearby metal through-hull fitting, then into the surrounding water, then through the propeller and shaft, which are grounded to the negative side of the direct current system via the engine block, and back to the battery. The propeller shaft becomes the path of least resistance. It corrodes at the current exit point. The failed bilge pump motor that D'Antonio documented in his published case study was leaking direct current into bilge water in contact with an unbonded through-hull. The prop blade in his documentation was destroyed by that single fault. The owner had no idea it was happening until a diver found it. The most insidious version of stray current damage involves shore power, and it is the one that surprises boat owners most because it comes from a source they never suspected. It is an invisible form of galvanic and stray current corrosion. When a boat is plugged into shore power at a marina, its AC safety ground connects to the dock's grounding circuit. If a neighboring boat on the same shore power circuit has depleted anodes, the green AC safety ground wiring that runs between both vessels connects their bonding systems electrically. As D'Antonio described in his Cruising World article, when his zinc anodes are depleted, yours take over, protecting both boats' underwater hardware. That protection does not last long, because your anodes are now doing double duty. In a busy marina with multiple boats on the same shore power circuit, this intervessel galvanic drain can consume anodes in a fraction of their normal service life. One diver who services marina boats professionally described finding boats with perfectly new anodes installed 30 days earlier already consumed past the 50% threshold, with no explanation other than the galvanic load from neighboring vessels. That scenario plays out at marinas across every coastal market, and most of the owners on either side of the transaction have no idea it is happening. Here is where the fix sits relative to the problem. A complete set of zinc or aluminum anodes for an outboard center console costs under $100. A galvanic isolator installed between the shore power cord and the boat's electrical system costs between $40 and $200, and it blocks the low-voltage galvanic currents that flow between vessels through the shared shore power ground. A replacement propeller shaft on a large outboard setup costs hundreds to over $1,000. A replacement outdrive, which stray current can destroy in days, runs thousands of dollars. A professional diver inspection to confirm anode condition and check underwater metal integrity costs less than $100 at most marinas, and should be done at the start of every season for any boat kept in a wet slip. That inspection is the only way to know what the saltwater has been doing to the metal on the hull since the last time someone looked. For a relatively small outlay, you preserve protection and avoid catastrophic, costly failures. The protocol that experienced marine surveyors apply to corrosion risk is systematic, and it takes less than an hour to walk through correctly. Check every anode on the hull, the trim tabs, and the engine at the start of every season and at mid-season for boats kept in wet slips year-round. Replace any anode that is past 50% consumed, which is the universally agreed replacement threshold across West Marine, Fisheries Supply, and the Sleipner Group published Anode documentation. Confirm electrical continuity between each anode and the metal it is protecting by touching both with a continuity meter. A reading above 1 ohm means the circuit has resistance that is reducing the anode protective current flow. If the circuit is open, the anode is not protecting anything, regardless of how recently it was installed. Inspect the bilge for any wiring in contact with standing water, and seal every connection that is not rated for submersion. Test the potential difference between metal components on the hull using a reference cell in the water. Readings that indicate the metals are acting as anodes rather than being protected by sacrificial anodes mean the corrosion is already happening, and something is wrong with the protection system. Install a galvanic isolator if the boat uses shore power. If the neighboring berth changes frequently, consider an isolation transformer for complete protection against intervessel galvanic current. The invisible damage problem is not solved by looking at the boat from the dock. Saltwater does its work at every metal-to-metal contact point below the waterline, inside the engine cooling passages, at every through-hull penetration, and at every location where imperfect electrical continuity has left a metal component unprotected by the system that was supposed to defend it. A boat that looks perfect from the outside with clean gel coat, polished hardware, and a recently serviced engine can have a prop shaft dissolving, an outdrive corroding from the inside, and a through-hull fitting that will not survive next season. None of that announces itself until a diver finds it or until the metal fails under load. That is the nature of invisible damage. It does not send a warning, it sends a repair bill. The warning was always available in the anode condition, in the continuity readings, in the bilge wiring, and in the potential measurements that every experienced surveyor checks as a matter of course. The difference between a boat owner who never gets surprised by a corrosion failure and one who does is not luck. It is knowing where to look and looking on schedule before the saltwater finishes the calculation that started the day the boat was launched.